The United States of America is the greatest country in the history of the world. Our founding fathers understood that what makes a country great, it isn't necessarily its land, it's not its wealth, but it's the people that reside within it. No time in history before them had there been a constitution or a legal document set forth to govern a nation that relied on the individual and personal freedom and personal responsibility. That is the ideology that made the United States great and continues to make it great. But as we go forward, we see that that's changing. We stand on the shoulders of giants, whether it be educators in the past, whether it be our forefathers, whether it be our veterans that fought and died for our great country, whether it be mothers or fathers that raised generations of great children, whether it be entrepreneurs that created jobs, whether it be the slaves that were freed and went on to become successful and do their own job to prove that if they were left alone, they too could succeed. Those ideas of personal freedom and personal responsibility and the great ancestors we have before us have made us what we are today. We don't want to be the generation that lets that slide. Today we see that it's been going on for decades, that normal Americans and their personal freedom and responsibility has slowly eroded away. This is because all of our cultural institutions of power are dominated by the establishment, and particularly an establishment leftist ideology. This means that things like hard work and personal responsibility have been replaced with things such as victimhood and claiming that you're perpetually a victim and that's somehow worth something. A normal American works 9 to 5 and they just want to be left alone by the government. I've grown up in rural Pennsylvania my whole life. The people that I respect, the people I think are the salt of this country, are blue-collar workers that I see every day, my family and friends. Whether they be truck drivers, welders, they hunt for recreation and for a livelihood. Whether it be carpenters, whether it be educators or people in the service industry. These people just want to go to work, provide for their family, have a good life, and be left alone. Where is their voice? They've been drowned out amongst a chorus of the establishment left that controls all of our cultural institutions of power that shape the public narrative. Whether it be the mainstream media, which comes almost 95% from the establishment leftist perspective. The same is true of academia. The same is true of our entertainment industry in Hollywood. And you could also say that of the people that control Silicon Valley and many of these social media corporations. Imagine it. You work 9 to 5, you come home, want to relax, you turn on your local news. All of the information you get is from this establishment leftist perspective. So you turn the news off and maybe you get ready for your night class that you're taking. That academia is almost entirely coming from that establishment leftist perspective. So you say, you know what, I just want to forget about it all and tune on some television, something entertaining. So you turn on a late night comedy show. All of it's dominated by the exact same ideology, this establishment leftist perspective. So then maybe you go onto Facebook or Twitter or YouTube in order to talk to people that maybe share your life experience. But again, those are all ran by organizations and companies that come from that same establishment leftist perspective. And make no mistake about it, this isn't the leftist that's my friend or my neighbor that I'm talking about. These are oligarchs. These are people in the establishment, the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, that are really the movers and shakers and control the direction of our country. They don't care about normal Americans. The idea that it's left versus right, sure, there are things we disagree on, and I'm honest in this channel that I'm coming from the right. But I welcome my friends from the left that understand also that this corruption in the establishment needs to be fought. Until we fight back against this corruption, it doesn't matter if we're Democrats, Republicans, none of it will matter. Because the people that really control this country don't care about me and yours voice. The election of Donald Trump was the first time in my life that we see the possibility of outing the corruption of this establishment. And yet, and despite this, we see that the establishment is laughing. They think that they're still winning. People like James Comey that ran the FBI as a personal mercenary squad for the Democrats and Barack Obama laugh as they escape indictment after indictment, even as their crimes are made public for all to see. The media covers for them and celebrates this corruption. Academia and the entertainment industry in Silicon Valley go along with this. Where are the voices for normal Americans? But there is good news. There are people that are rising up. There are people that are running for office. There are people that are doing independent channels. There are people waking up by the millions that understand how corrupt this system is. Just the Iowa caucus starts to show many people on the left that didn't want to see it, how corrupt the DNC and the establishment is. We should be reaching out and talking to all these people and making allies to fight back against this corruption. My channel is about being a voice for normal Americans, whether you're a blue-collar worker in rural Pennsylvania that's been maligned as clinging to your guns and Bible, that's been called a racist deplorable, Or maybe you're in the inner city and you grew up in a single parent household and you've been told you're a victim your whole life and you're just trying to succeed, but everything tells you, no, you're a victim. Don't try to go out and have personal responsibility and achieve on your own. Or anyone in between. This is a show for you. We are here to discuss the issues of normal Americans, to bring truth to everyday people that it's been hidden from by the oligarchs that really control our country and the establishment. They need to control the flow of information and all of those cultural institutions of power that I mentioned in order to make sure that they could pass their agenda, because they know the secret. If the normal person, if the average American were to find out how corrupt this was, they wouldn't stand for it. The way we win this battle is by bringing information to the millions and millions of Americans that have been lied to, that through the sweat of their labor, through their hard work, have enriched corrupt politicians, have enriched corrupt people in the media and other corrupt people that aren't elected in office like these bureaucrats, that have outsourced our wealth to other countries to further enrich the politicians that send that wealth over there. If the average and normal American wakes up to this, we can begin taking back our country. The war will be fought with information. That is what my channel and so many of the channels I'm associated are trying to do. That's what we're trying to do today. So please, I encourage you, follow my channel, support it, follow other independent content creators, follow the people that I'm connected to, and even if you're on the left, follow independent content creators on the left. But take away this gatekeeping power of the establishment to control all flow of information. Real people with facts and truth on their side do not hide from the First Amendment. We don't hide from open speech and open debate. We'll bring diverse opinions on. We'll bring people that disagree because we understand that we're about the flow of information and allowing everyone to make up their own mind. We do not need to censor voices like the establishment. So I welcome to my channel, the Normal America channel, and I hope that you'll enjoy yourself. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good one. Hello! Sorry for the intro. I had stuff I had to get done, so had to do the intro. So just to give people a clue. So if you missed it, I just did an interview or a discussion with my good friend Milo. It's a friend of the show. So check that out. It'll be up. It's probably just uploading on places like YouTube right now. So you can check that out if you missed it. But thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So the show I want to talk about today is getting into some data, some statistics, and my buddy Carlos, who I do the radio show with, sent me a request. It's something I haven't looked at. I just saw a brief overview of it, which is a talking point. It's basically flashcards from Black Lives Matter as to how to respond to racist comments that people will question you by. So I'll go through that with you, and I'm sure I'll be able to debunk everything they're saying immediately, even though I haven't read it beforehand. But before I start, some breaking news. In addition to Washington, D.C., again, thanks to Democratic-controlled mayor not allowing the police to do their job, they're pulling down statues tonight, trying to set up a black autonomous zone, the Black House Autonomous Zone. They vandalized a church because, Sean King, one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter, said that images of Jesus that are white need to be tore down because that's also white supremacy. They're coming after your churches next, and still Republicans do nothing. Never forget that. But that's not even the breaking news I want to talk about. From 5 minutes ago, Seattle mayor relents, will end chop zone, and send police back into neighborhood. Seattle's mayor on Monday dramatically reversed course on the city's police-free zone after a weekend of deadly violence, saying the lawless makeshift protest area would be dismantled and officers sent in to restore order. From the mayor, quote, "There should be no place in Seattle that the Seattle Fire Department and Seattle Police Department can't go," Mayor Jenny Durkin told a news conference as she announced plans to end the Capitol Hill Organized Protest Zone, also known by the acronym CHOP. The announcement was a remarkable turnabout for a Democratic mayor who received significant criticism for allowing rioters and protesters to take control of the neighborhood 2 weeks ago, and then suggesting on CNN that CHOP might be the epicenter of a long, quote, summer of love. Her change of heart came after a weekend of 2 shootings, 1 fatal in the zone, which has kept businesses in the area closed, neighbors on edge, and police barricaded outside. A 19-year-old man was shot dead in the zone on Saturday. The cumulative impacts of gatherings and protests in the nighttime atmosphere and violence has led to increasingly difficult circumstances for businesses and residents, the mayor said, and the impacts have increased and the safety has decreased. Well, there you have it. Wait a minute. I thought the Seattle mayor said it was all going to be sunshines and roses and it was going to be a great summer of love. It was all Trump's fault. How dare those evil right-wingers suggest that you can't have people set up autonomous zones and claim that they're an insurrection from the United States? How dare they suggest that that's a bad idea? Isn't that what all the progressives said? Isn't that what the Seattle mayor said? Now someone's dead and at least 3 people have been shot. Businesses have been destroyed. People have been significantly harmed. There's been reports of extortion, of rapes, and the police haven't been able to get in there. And now she says, we can't have a zone where police can't get into. Really? It took for someone being murdered before you came to that conclusion? Something that every 3rd grader in the country could have told you? And that's where we're at tonight? Oh, I have no idea. Now she's going to act like she acted as an appropriate leader. She did not. She gave in to mob rule because that's what all of these leaders, even on the Republican side, are doing. They are afraid that the mob will come after them. So they say, oh no, do what you want. Tear down the statues. Create your own autonomous zone. Please just don't come after me. And now, when she sends the police in because she's allowed this insurrection to occur, now there will be violence that occurs with these people that are barricaded in when the police get sent in to take them out. Instead of not leaving them take control of the area in the first place, which would have resulted in less violence. If you actually stopped the people that were being violent, vandalizing property, extorting people, and trying to set up an autonomous zone in the first place, they would have been arrested and this gentleman would still be alive. These people wouldn't have been shot. But you wanted to prove a political point. Because that's what the left is. They don't care that people are dying. They don't care that businesses are being ruined. They don't care at all. This mayor in Seattle does not care at all. She set a situation up hoping that Donald Trump would send in the military so that the Democrats could say, see, look at how much of a dictator Trump is. But he didn't, and now people are dead. Tucker's show tonight talked about, again, which is something I've been talking about since day one. I've been talking about this since March with the coronavirus. Where is the Republican leadership? Look, make no mistake about it. I've been arguing with this sort of race stuff since 2004 when I was in debate, even before that, 2003. And they tried to make the argument that the definition of racism is you need racial bigotry plus institutional power. Now that's nonsense. You could be a racist with 0 institutional power. But if that's the definition that they're going to go with, and Merriam-Webster is officially changing the definition of racism to meet that, what side has the political power right now? Which side has institutional power? Let's just run a little thought experiment. Can you imagine the Tea Party or a militia group, a right-wing militia group, taking over 6 city blocks for a few weeks? Can you imagine any political leader in this country, mayor, governor, saying, yeah, that's fine, we don't have a problem with that? Can you imagine right-wingers tearing down statues that they weren't in favor of? Maybe some MLK statues or Bill Clinton statues. Can you imagine that? You think that would fly? Of course not. Can you imagine people losing their jobs for supporting Black Lives Matter? Of course not. Yet that's exactly what we see happening in the inverse. All of these institutions are controlled by people that endorse Black Lives Matter and their communist agenda. Maybe they don't, they're saying they endorse it. Maybe they're just fearful of it. But either way, they've tacitly approved of it, at the very least. Yet still, this movement's so powerful, they pretend like they don't have the institutional power when they have it all. That's what's going on. So by their own definition, they're the ones that are racist. They are racially bigoted. They hate white people. Remember, these statues, when the Washington statue got torn down, it said white fragility, defund white people. When the Jefferson statue got torn down, it said kill whitey. But it's not about race. It's not about race at all. Except every time you hear them, they say, we're Marxist, this is about race, we want segregation, we want the disbanding of the police.
But when you tune in to all of the people, when I debated people a couple weeks ago, oh, no, the Black Lives Matter is great. It's just one or two fringe people that are saying that. Sean King, probably the most visible, at least the whitest person in Black Lives Matter, Malcolm X, he comes out and says, he's one of the most influential leaders of them. He comes out today and says, we need to remove images of Jesus that is white because that's white supremacy. So they'll be coming for your churches next. And guess what? Most church leaders, they'll say, that's okay, that's good. Just like that church leader in D.C., remember? He wasn't worried that they tried to burn down the church, or she, I think, actually. They were more worried that Trump took a photo op there. So this is what we get when no one speaks up and emboldens the mob. What have I told you about these violent left-wing mobs like Antifa for years? It wasn't that they are particularly intimidating or have particularly huge numbers. None of that's the real danger of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. The real danger is they have institutional support. There is no institution whatsoever that would support a white supremacist group, such as the KKK. If the KKK comes out, not only does everyone in polite society say, shut up, you're a joke, but certainly anyone with any amount of institutional power would condemn them voraciously. And if they don't, if they say something that even seems like perhaps it could be supporting them, like when, was it Steve King came out, a Republican, and said, I don't see what's wrong with saying white nationalist, he gets drummed out of the party. But we have the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist group that hates white people and Jews, running security at George Floyd's protest, or funeral. And despite the fact that every major network carried the funeral, no one said a word. I'm the only person who's been talking about it. So black nationalists, that's perfectly fine. Black racists, perfectly fine. And make no mistake about it, I'm not saying everyone who says the term Black Lives Matter is a racist. But their movement's agenda is racist. They want segregated hospitals. They want to give people land based on their skin color. They want to condemn people based on their skin color. They're saying that if you put an image of Jesus up that isn't the skin color that they want, that's white supremacy. They're trying to dismantle the history of this country. They're trying to dismantle the country itself. That's what these Marxists want. They're fascist Marxists. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to kind of give a toolbox on exactly how to deal with the arguments that you hear that are coming out. So what is I was talking to my friend Milo, and he's like, I don't understand why they're being so difficult about real world solutions that could solve police brutality. I'm paraphrasing. And I told him, I said, it's because it's not about solving police brutality. That might be what the average person wants. But Black Lives Matter is a political cult. What they want is the destruction of the United States. They're postmodernists. They're cultural Marxists. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They don't want to treat everyone equally. They do want segregation. They are the exact inverse of the KKK and Jim Crow advocates in the 40s and before. They don't want us equal. They want us separate. It's just they want to be in charge. That's what this is about. Some sort of perceived revenge. They want to take down anything they consider Western values because it's racist. They think the Enlightenment, which came out of Western Europe, the idea that we should treat each other as equals, that we should seek to get knowledge, seek to better ourselves as humanity. They think that those ideas of the Enlightenment are racist. That's why they're against the sciences. 5,000 scientists came out and said, we think that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are racist. They want to end science. That's what they want. Because truth and facts are racist. They want an end to the United States. And they've been talking about it openly in campuses all across this country. And it's now the prevailing narrative of the institutions that control this country. The mainstream media, the entertainment industry, our political system, the people that control the police. Maybe not the police officers themselves. Hollywood. Silicon Valley. But one of the ways they convinced the average person to go along with this is they were clever. It might not look like it makes sense, the arguments they're making, but tactically, the tactics they're using are very sensible. If your goal is you don't care about telling the truth and you want to win by any means necessary, what they're doing tactically makes a lot of sense. And that is they have taken names and terms and then used them to sound benign, like Black Lives Matter, or Antifa means anti-fascist. And so if you disagree with that, then clearly you like fascists, or clearly you don't think that Black Lives Matter if you disagree with their agenda. And this works for the average person. And so the average person is buying this line that this is all about systemic racism, that the cops are out there killing unarmed black people because they're racist in record numbers. None of that is true. None of it's true. But the average person has no idea, because to even talk about this is verboten. So what I thought I would do, because I had a conversation on a blog today about this, is that I would actually go through the latest numbers I could find from the Bureau of Justice statistics and actually show exactly what's going on. So I'm at minute 21. Let's begin. Maybe I'll clip this and just make it its own video. So, excuse me there. So I have here the U.S. Department of Justice criminal victimization in 2018. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to table 12. Scrolling. This is fun for everyone, huh? I should have had this set up. All right, now let me see what you all can see. Here's table 12. Table 12 is the percent and number of violent incidents by total population, victim, and offender demographic characteristics in 2018. Now, let me first tell you why I'm doing this. I'm not someone who wants to say poor white people or poor people that look like me or from my community, we're more victims, we have more victimhood. I have no interest in doing that. The reason I'm doing this is the prevailing narrative in this country is that our institutional systems are racist. The fact that blacks are 2.25 or 2.5 more likely to be shot by police proves that police officers are racist or police departments are systemically racist, and that there is this epidemic of white people being racist towards black and enacting violence on black people. So I'm not saying this to say black people are inferior. I'm not doing this to say white people are the real victims and woe is me as a white person. That's not what any of this is about. This is about using data, real data, to rebut the narrative that is taking control of our country and allowing things like riots, allowing things like the destruction of our history, allowing things like the canceling of people if they don't support this Marxist movement. It's about them saying that science is racist. All of this is incredibly dangerous and will lead to mass bloodshed if cooler heads don't prevail. Going to the data and the objective truth is always what we should seek to do. Now, let me first start by saying that the statistics that are cited are, well, blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be shot by the police, therefore that proves racism. It does not, because you would ask yourself, why is that? What is the reasoning behind that? Could racism be a factor? Absolutely. Could there be other factors? Of course there could be. To me, it seems evident that the most important factor would be, take skin color out of the equation. If police are in communities where there's a lot of violence, there would be more likely to be violent interactions with the police, both justified and unjustified from the police's end. So if you're in a community, like perhaps a senior city community, maybe of whites, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and there's almost no crime there, I'll bet you the percentage of violent altercations with the police are next to none, because the cops aren't constantly dealing with criminal element, they're not dealing with incredible amounts of violence. But if you're in inner city Chicago that's like a war zone, then of course the police fear for their lives, they're dealing with violent criminals more often, and so they're more likely to justifiably or unjustifiably use force. Does this mean that we shouldn't try to weed out unjustifiable uses of force? Of course not. But we have to be honest about what the data shows us. And so we go to what we have is the most recent numbers I can find, but it's the Bureau of Justice here and their victimization survey that calculates these crimes, and it does so by things like age, by things like gender, by things like ethnicity. So the first thing I want you to look at is, you'll be able to see here, let's go to the area that says sex. So we have male and female. So just look at the number of offenders. 4.2 million men are offenders of violent crime. Now, another way of putting that, in a way that these people from Black Lives Matter try to spin this is, well, it's not just their offenders. This means that 4.2 million whites, or at least incidents of whites, because let's remember, there could be incidents where the same person commits multiple violent crimes. So this isn't going to be an exact one person per one violent crime, but it gives us a really close idea. So they would say, look at the discrepancy between male and female there. Only about 1 million for female that were violent offenders, but 4.2 million for male. Does that prove that the system is systemically bigoted against men? Of course not. It's because men are committing more of these crimes. And so we can go over here and say men are 48.6% of the population, yet they're the offender 77% of the time. So nearing double the percentage, well, I can't say that. About a time and a half more their percentage of the population, they're the offender. Women are 52% of the population, but only responsible for 18.3% of violent crimes. So it would make sense that then there are more violent interactions between the police and men, because men are committing the bulk of these violent crimes. But no one says the police are bigoted against men. There aren't Men Lives Matter movements. People aren't rioting for men's rights and the bigoted cops that are misandrist against men. Why is that? Well, because we understand there are underlying reasons for this data. It could be cultural. It could be things like, at the extreme levels, we know, for example, biologically, men are more likely to be aggressive. It could be men are more likely to be poor. All sorts of reasons. And we understand that as a society. Now, why shouldn't we apply that same scrupulous nature to the same data when it refers to ethnicity? So here's some numbers I want you to look at. The first column you can see here under race and ethnicity is population. For now, we're just going to look at white and black, because the narrative, again, the reason we're doing this is the narrative is that the police, because they shoot 2.5 times, you're more likely to be shot as a black man 2.5 times more than as a white man by the police. That must prove racism. And that there is a rash of white on black crime, that whites are systemically violent towards blacks, and it's occurring at disproportionate levels. So let's see what the data actually says. The population of whites is 171 million and some change. They were the offender 2.6 million times. They were the victim 3.9 million times. Blacks are 33 million and some change in the population in 2018. And again, this is 2018, the most recent statistics I could find. They were the offender 1.1 million times, and they were the victim 640,000 times. Now, here's the two numbers that I want you to focus on. Let's go over to this section that says percent ratio. And there's two numbers here that are worth looking at. One is offender to victim, and one is offender to population. So let me explain what these numbers are. Offender to population is the ratio that you're likely to be an offender based on your population in that area. For example, we know that blacks make up about 12% of the population, as the 2018 numbers show. Yet, they're the offender in 21% of all violent crime. So when it comes to the ratio of the offense or the offender of violent crime based on the ratio or the percentage of population they have, so what they did was they took the number of the total population, well, they took the number of the offender by the race, so blacks, 1.1 million and change, and divided that by the population. That's how you get the offender to population. And blacks are 1.8. Now compare that to whites that are 0.8. In other words, blacks are twice as likely, more than twice, almost 2.5 times more likely to commit violent crimes than whites. It's about 2.25. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think it's an accident that it's almost identical that police are 2.5% more likely, or 2.5 times more likely to shoot blacks? And it's almost that identical number that blacks are about 2.5 more times likely to commit crimes? Do you think that's an accident? Of course it isn't. Now, the other number here that might be the most important number, though, is offender to victim. Now, what this did was it takes the number of times that someone of a certain race was an offender versus the number of times that someone of a certain race was a victim. So with whites, we could see whites were 2.6 million. You can see the number right here. 2.6 million and change offenders of violent crimes in 2018. They were victims, 3.9 million and change. So that means whites were much more likely to be the victim of violent crime overall than to commit violent crime overall. And the ratio we get from dividing those numbers is 0.8. So about 1.5 times more likely to be a victim of violent crime if you're a white person than to commit a violent crime. The same's true of Hispanics. Hispanics, more likely, you could see, the offenders 760,000 times, they were the victim 820,000 times. More likely, Hispanics are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than be the perpetrators of violent crime. The same is true of Asians. 131,000 times they were the offender of violent crime, but almost 250,000 times they were the victims of violent crime. All of the races listed are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than to be the offender, except blacks. Blacks were the offenders 1.15 million times of violent crimes, and they were only the victim 640,000 and some change. So when you go over to this offender to victim ratio, you see 2.0. That means, on average, blacks are twice as likely to commit violent crime than be the victim of violent crime. And they are the only race singled out that are more likely to be offenders than victims. Now let me pause here again. Am I saying that proves that black people are inferior or that we should be racist or not want black people in our community? No. The stats and the data aren't racist. You could use them in a racist way, and I reject that. I think this shows there are problems in these communities that we need to seriously deal with. Even when looking at these numbers, still understand this. If you take the number 1.1 million and change violent crimes committed by blacks, and then you take the total population of blacks, you're still looking at only, let me check my numbers, a 1.6% chance on average of a black committing a violent crime in a year. That's an incredibly low percentage of the entire population. So anyone who wants to use these statistics to make broad sweeping generalizations about all black people is doing so in a very racist way. However, it is addressing a problem that seems to be unique, or at least an outlier, when it comes to other ethnicities compared to the black community. I bring this up because I think that these numbers are appalling and we need to help these communities out. And both Republicans and Democrats have failed the inner city. Also, something that we don't have in these statistics that's very, very important, and it's very difficult to find, is what is the percentage of the people in these populations, such as white, black, Hispanic, Asian, that live in these inner city high crime areas? In other words, it would be nice to get statistics, for example, of whites and blacks and the ratios of victimhood to offender in rural communities or in suburban communities. And I bet those numbers go way down and almost even out amongst ethnicities. So what we're really seeing more than a problem of race is a problem with these communities, such as inner city Chicago and Detroit and Baltimore and DC and New York, which happen to predominantly be black communities. But this isn't an indictment. These stats don't really tell the story of blacks that don't live in these communities. So, we see that there is a problem. That the only race that's more likely 2-to-1, which is an incredibly high ratio, 2-to-1 more likely to be offender than the victim of violent crime. And that's the important thing to remember here. This is referring to violent crime, not parking tickets, not things of that nature, but violent crime. So we can see that the numbers, the ratio almost exactly adds up. Blacks are 2 point something odd are 2 point something times more likely to commit violent crime, and that's the exact number almost that they're more likely to be involved in violent altercations, including shootings with the police. Now, you may say, well, there's a bunch of systemically racist reasons because our system has screwed over black people, which means that they're more likely to commit violent crime. But that's a conversation that I've had and will have on another day. But to blame the police and law enforcement for the interactions when they go into these violent communities and just say, oh, it must be racism, is insane. And they're doing it so much that they're saying abolish the police. So even if you said, okay, these violent crimes are occurring because slavery and Jim Crow led to poor economic situations for blacks, that's why they're committing more of these crimes. Fair enough, we can have that discussion. I think the story's far more complex than that. But why are you then pointing your finger at the police like they're the problem? You're admitting that these crimes are occurring. And again, these are violent crimes, not just smoking weed or got a parking ticket. Now, another argument that you hear is, yes, but these statistics must also be racist, and they're compiled by people in law enforcement, so they're intentionally skewed against black people. But that's not true, because one thing that we could agree on, as this survey shows, is the predominant way that crime occurs racially is intra-racially and not inter-racially. In other words, blacks are more likely to commit crimes of violence against blacks, whites are more likely to commit violence crimes against whites, Hispanics against Hispanics, Asians against Asians, etc. And that's for various reasons, but the most simplistic of which is you're more likely to commit violence against people you see every day. So if you live in a community that's predominantly black and you're black, you're more likely to commit crime against the people that are predominantly black. So given that we know that, let's for a second not look at the offender. Let's look at the victims. So not only do blacks make up 50% plus of homicide offenders, they also make up 50% of homicide victims. And we know that most of the time it's people killing each other within their own race. Do you think the police are making up these bodies? The 7,000 something odd blacks that were killed last year? You think the cops just made that up? You think that rural whites are coming into inner city Chicago this weekend and killing 14 blacks, including a 3-year-old toddler? Or do you think it's more likely gang violence? So is it just a coincidence that the victim numbers almost directly add up to what we see with the offender numbers when it comes to homicide? Again, making up a violent crime statistic in a police department, if your argument is they're so racist, they're just making up crimes. Maybe you would be able to make that argument with speeding tickets, with drug usage tickets. But when you're talking about violent crimes, you have a victim. And the idea that the police are en masse creating fake victims just to blame blacks for violent crimes is nonsense. Now, that explains this interactions with police. At least it goes a long way to explaining. So the idea of just looking at the data and saying, if there's a discrepancy, that proves racism. Well, we would never do that here. You wouldn't just say, wow, blacks are the only ethnicity that are more likely to be offenders of violent crime than victims. In fact, they're twice as likely to be an offender than a victim of a violent crime. We wouldn't just stop there. We'd say, what are the underlying reasons? So why is it different when we talk about police interactions with the black community? But there's also this narrative that there's a rash of violence from whites to the black community. So first, let me say, the majority, as I've said, of violent crime is intra-racial. So this narrative is nonsense from the get-go, as we can see from the data. But let's get into the data and see, using the most recent data we have, how this claim adds up. So, what we need to do here is first look at the total populations of whites and blacks. So we have that number right here. Whites, again, 171 million and change. Blacks, 33 million and change. Now, we could look at the percent of, where did I find these numbers? I think maybe table 15. We see in this chart the percent of violent incidents and percent of the U.S. population by victim, race, or ethnicity in 2018. Actually, let's go back up to table 12. I think that's the one I actually want. Where is it? Excuse me for a second while I look up this data. Well, it's not that table. It might be 60. Here it is. Table 14. Percent of violent incidents by victim and offender race or ethnicity in 2018. So we'll go back to those population numbers, but just keep that in mind. 171 million whites, 33 million blacks, and some change. So the number of violent incidents that occurred, victims, there were 3.5 million violent incidences of victims that were white. With blacks, there were 563,000 incidents of victims that were black. So let's start with the white. 3.5 million. 15.3% of those crimes of violence against whites were committed by blacks. So if we do the math, 15.3% of 3.5 million, that number there is 547,948 instances of violent crimes perpetrated by blacks against white. So over 500,000. Now, let's go to blacks. Blacks had 563,000 and some change violent incidents where they were the victim. 10.6% of the time, that was committed by white people. So if we take that number, 10.6% of this 500,000 number is 59,777. So let's just look at the raw number. According to these statistics, in 2018, there were 547,948. Over 500,000 instances of violent crimes where blacks were the perpetrator against white. That's almost the entire amount of violent incidents that occurred in the black community. Now, whites against black, 59,000 and change. Now, when we factor in the total population number and that there are far fewer blacks than whites, we could start to get an idea of what, on average, a chance of a particular member of a race would be to commit violence against the other race. In this case, looking at black to whites. So, for example, we have this number of 547,948. That was the amount of times that blacks committed violent crimes against whites. So if we divide that 540,000 number by the total population of blacks, we get that blacks are 1.654. And I'm going to change, if you don't mind, where I already have this written out. So let me read what I've written here so you can see. We can see from this table, whites were the victims of violent crime 3.5 million and change times in 2018. 15.3 of those were committed by blacks, which is 547,948 violent crimes by blacks committed against whites. There were 563,000 and change violent crimes committed against blacks by whites, or committed against blacks total. 10.6% were by whites, which rounds out to about 59,000 and change violent crimes of whites to blacks. Now we take the population numbers and figure out the chances of an individual of each race attacking the other race. 547,948 instances of black violent crimes on white, divided by the total population of blacks, which is 33 million and change, gives us a percentage, 1.654 on average, of a black person committing a violent crime against a white. 59,777 violent crimes of whites committing against blacks, divided by the total population of whites, which is 171 million and change, gives us a percentage of likelihood on average of a white to commit a violent crime against blacks, which is 0.035%. Lastly, we take the percentage likelihood of blacks to commit violent crimes against whites and divide that by the likelihood of whites to commit violent crimes against blacks. That'll give us a final number of how much more likely a black person is to commit violence against a white. So we take the percentage chance of a white to commit violence against blacks, which is 0.035%, and we divide that by the percentage of a black on average likely to commit a violent crime to white, 1.654, and that gives us 47.257. Now, all of this data heavy stuff, it seems boring. What I just showed you is, in 2018, blacks were 47 times more likely to commit violence against whites than vice versa. 47 times. Have you heard any of these institutions talk about a rash of violence from the black community against the white community? Anywhere? You'd be called a racist for even discussing this. I'm sure I'll be called a racist. I'm not using this data, again I'll say, to say blacks are inferior. I think we need to look at the reasons underlying these numbers. Cultural reasons, fatherless reasons, education reasons, poverty reasons, living in high population density areas. This victimhood mentality, encouraging people in certain communities to racially hate other people because you say those racial groups, whites are horrible and they hate blacks and they're all racist. That's why I bring this up. The data does not back up their narrative. It disproves their narrative. Yet to even discuss the data gets you called a racist. Thank you, Freebird. I knew someone would. I'll repeat it again if you want. I'll go back to the numbers. Here's what you need to know. The numbers I've cited. Blacks are close to 2.5 times more likely than whites to commit violent crimes. That's the exact number. Of course, it's not exact, but it's close to the exact number of how many times more likely they are to be shot by police. Do you think that's a coincidence? Whites are far more likely to be the victim of violent crime than the offender. Hispanics are as well. So are Asians. Blacks are the only ethnicity listed that are they're more likely to be the offender than the victim of violent crime. In fact, they're twice as likely. Does this prove that they're inferior? No! There could be tons of underlying reasons why. But this explains why there are more violent interactions with the police. So saying get rid of police departments because they're shooting unarmed black men at a record pace because of racism is a lie. The data doesn't back it up. Now, as to the narrative of whites are out using systemic violence against blacks, it's not true. Again, let's go back to this real quick so you can see. We can see from this table, whites were the victims of violent crime 3.5 million times in 2018. 15.3% of those crimes were committed by blacks, which would round out to 547,000 and change violent crimes by blacks committed against whites. There were 563,000 violent crimes committed against all blacks in 2018. 10.6% of those were committed by whites, which rounds out to about 59,000 and change violent crimes of whites on black. Now we take in the population numbers. If there were 547,000 instances of black on white violent crime, and we divide by the total population of blacks, that gives us a 1.654 on average chance that an individual that's black will commit a violent crime against a white person. Again, this data is not going to be exactly accurate because we don't have proof of how many of these incidents occurred with one perpetrator committing multiple violent offenses. But this is a good idea. Now, with whites, we see that they committed 59,000 and change violent crimes against blacks. If we divide that by the total population of whites, we can see the chance of an individual white committing a violent crime against a black is 0.035%. So if we divide that 0.035%, which is the chance on average of a white committing violence against a black in a year, versus the chance of a black committing violence against a white, which is 1.654%, that gives us the total that blacks in 2018 were 47 times more likely to commit violence against whites than vice versa. An individual black was 47 times more likely to commit violence against a white than vice versa. Now, if you just listen to the media, you would think those numbers would be inverted. You would think 20, 30 times more likely that whites are going out using violence against blacks. It's not true. Oh, yeah, thank you for those that are from Above Top Secret. I really appreciate it. It's conspiracy website. It kind of morphed into a political site. Unfortunately, it might be going away. But yeah, I did a video you can check out just the other day on that. Now, again, let me say it as clear as possible. Does this prove that this is indicative of all black people? No. Even the number I showed that it's less than 2%. So to smear the entire black community would be nonsense. And what my data that I'm pointing here doesn't show is that it's really just select communities even within the black population. For example, it's predominantly young black males, and it's predominantly young black males in these inner cities. So anyone who's using what I'm saying here to smear all black people does not have my consent to do so. That is an outrageous misuse of this data. And I totally reject it. But it does show that the narrative that's being pushed is a lie. So I don't know how long I went there, 20, 30 minutes. I might clip that. And I hope that gives people some sort of basis to be able to start to argue against this argument. Oh, but blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be shot from police. That proves racism. No, it doesn't. That's almost the exact proportion of more likelihood they are to commit violent crimes per number of their population. Oh, but whites are just using violence against blacks all the time. That's not true. The numbers are actually relatively low for black on white crime and white on black. But if we're going to make interracial comparisons, an individual black in 2018 was 47 times more likely to commit violence against a white than vice versa. So sorry if you find that sort of data boring, but this is what's important. You have to understand, even then on Above Top Secret, where I was discussing this earlier today, inevitably, you get people saying, yes, but that's because of systemically racist society. That's why blacks are more violent. Fine, we could talk about that. I don't mind talking about that, and I have done debates and discussed that, and I'll continue to do that. But that doesn't prove that the police, just based on that number of 2.5 times more likely to shoot blacks, are doing so because they're racist or law enforcement is racist. And so the solutions of disband the police are total nonsense. And it will actually make things worse in the black community because homicides will go up, which is exactly what we're seeing right now. But the next argument you hear is, yes, but black people feel like this is what's happening. And it's, by the way, it's not all blacks, but there are a lot of people that feel that law enforcement is using lethal violence on blacks disproportionately. And there's a lot of people that feel that whites are using violence on blacks disproportionately. I reject that mentality as strong as a human being can. Your subjective truth does not outweigh the objective truth. And this goes to the critical race theory and intersectionality and their use of postmodernist thought. The postmodernists do not believe there is a capital T truth. So they would look at this data and say, no, this data it's irrelevant. The facts don't matter. What matters is the people's feelings. But once we say that we can no longer look at objective data, then there's no longer room for conversation. If it's just everyone's feelings, well, Black Lives Matter feels this way, and I feel a different way. And we can't look to objective truths and say, well, wait a minute, here's the objective truth of what's going on. Once we say you can't do that and all that matters is our feelings, violence is inevitable. Because each group's going to feel, hey, I feel my thoughts are right, and therefore you're wrong. No need for discussion. My feelings are all that matter. You saw this with the Kavanaugh hearings. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, who's probably going to be the vice president candidate, at least, which would make her the presidential candidate by default because Joe Biden's suffering from dementia. He's just an empty suit. They said, it doesn't matter if we could prove that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted Christine Blasey Ford. What matters is her truth. There were people literally making the argument that it was disqualifying for Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court because he didn't understand to Christine Blasey Ford, even if he knew he didn't assault her, he needs to understand she says he assaulted her. And so she's a victim. No, she's not if she wasn't a victim of a sexual assault. That's how insane this postmodernist logic takes you to. You have to apologize for raping someone even if you didn't rape them, because they think you did rape them. That's insanity. We cannot exist as a society if we can't point to actual truths. So I know that that's a little different than what I usually do here going into that data, but I thought it was important. Now, moving on, kind of a similar subject. So we're going to do this together. I saw a brief outline of what this was. My friend Carlos, who a lot of you know, I do a radio show with on Saturday, he actually sent me something that he saw on Facebook, which is kind of flashcards being given to people on how to combat racist arguments against the Black Lives Matter movement. So I have kind of an idea of what they're saying, but I haven't looked at the details. I just got this and I was like, great, I'll talk about this in the show. So I'm going to bring it up, and we're all going to look at it for the first time together, and I will hopefully be able to respond and show you how to respond to the argumentation that is being pushed forth by Black Lives Matter people to counter the types of arguments that I'm making. Now, let me first say, because I haven't read the specifics, it is possible that there could be arguments on here that I'll say, yeah, that's a solid argument. I'm opening myself to the idea that they could have good arguments against the type of things that I've been saying. And I honestly try to go into discussions with people that disagree with me with good faith until proven otherwise. Do I think that the leaders of Black Lives Matter are arguing in good faith? No. But that doesn't mean someone citing these arguments couldn't be doing so. So let's do it together and see what happens. Let me bring it up. The font's a little small, so hopefully you guys can read it, but I'll read it out to you. So it's a handy little graphic, it seems. It's made by Sharcubed and inspired by @SUJDY_Shan. It says, helpful rebuttals for racist talking points. Well, right out of the gate, you could see that they put the cart before the horse. So they're assuming, again, right out of the gate, they assume you're racist. If you make any of the arguments that they're going to list under here, that's a racist talking point. Now, does this sound like someone who's starting off wanting to have a discussion in good faith? Of course not. It says, this isn't meant to be comprehensive or the angles you have to take, but it's a good starting point or reference guide for hard conversations. Feel free to share. You got it. So what's the first racist talking point? Cops kill more white people than black people. That's objectively true, but apparently it's racist to bring that up. Huh. Isn't that clever how they already bake that into the cake? But anyways, let's see what they say. They say, here's how to respond to that, according to Black Lives Matter. There are an estimated 5.7 times more white people in America than black people. So yes, by sheer numbers, white people are killed by police more. But cops don't kill white people simply because they're black, or they're white. And black people are killed by cops at 3 times higher rate than white people, often when unarmed. That's a glaring inequality, and it exists because of race. Okay, so first off, they imply that black people are being killed just because they're black. There is no proof for that. That's when they say white people aren't killed just for being white. So the implication is black people are killed just for being black. There's no evidence for that. They don't give any here. Second, they say that it's 3 times higher than white people. That's not true. It's closer to 2.5 times higher than white people. They say this occurs often while unharmed. Last year it was 15 unarmed blacks. Many of those shootings were objectively justifiable. So in a time where we had over 7,000 blacks be victims of homicide, almost all of which was black on black crime, they talk about this as a big issue. 15. That's the issue they're talking about. They say that's glaring inequality. Well, again, that's because they're looking at the numbers per capita. They're not looking at per violent crime. So when you factor in, if I would word this differently, that blacks are killed at a rate 2.5 times higher because they commit 2.5 times more violent crime, all of a sudden that number doesn't seem like it's based on race. But you can see here, they just say blacks are killed at a higher percentage, therefore it's because of racism. That's nonsense. There's no proof for that. And then they continue, hey, consider this. The fact that police brutalize and kill people is a problem in general, which is why we should be against all police brutality. Yes, I totally agree. But we can see that the numbers of police brutality and homicides or shootings to unarmed people have been going down across the board. And we will never have a society where there aren't unjustified actions by the police. Consider this. Police are necessary. We need some sort of law enforcement. A civil society needs laws or rules or whatever you want to call them, and they need people tasked with defending those rules. Otherwise, we have anarchy, and there's bloodshed on the streets, which is never advisable. It's a terrible idea. So if law enforcement's necessary, inevitably there will be bad law enforcement actors or bad situations that occur, and we should try to minimize them. That's true, and we should deal with them when they come up. But pretending that because that exists that we need these riots or we need to endorse Marxism or we need to endorse beating shop owners or looting or tearing down statues of George Washington, setting up autonomous zones is nonsense. And this is a clever trick that they often try to employ. They act like, well, no matter how low the numbers are, any unjustifiable use of police brutality means that this sort of revolution is necessary. But that's nonsense. If you would take that same mentality, then you would say, well, then any instance of white on black crime justifies blacks lashing out against whites, or vice versa. We cannot have a civil society if that's the case. So yes, things were getting better, but yes, there's still room for improvement. But to act like this is somehow proof that cops are racist is bogus. Starting off good already, right? Next, quote, the problem is black people commit more crime. Oh, okay. Let's see what they say to that. Apparently it's racist to bring that up. Correction. Crimes committed by black people are more reported and or over-attributed in a corrupt system that values arrest quotas. That's garbage. Again, we could look at the National Crime Victimization Survey and see that over 50% of homicide victims a year are blacks. So are we to believe that the police are just making up these dead black people? It's absolute nonsense. The same is true of all violent crime. This might have some sort of point if you were making the argument about marijuana arrests, for example. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about violent crimes where we could point to the actual victims. Most oftentimes, they actually called law enforcement and described their perpetrator. So why would black victims be making up the fact that black perpetrators were the ones who victimized them? This is so dumb, it's unbelievable. They continue. As part of gentrification, there's often a higher police presence in diverse neighborhoods than in white neighborhoods. Okay, if that's true, that might explain why there's more instances of violent interactions with police and people in these black neighborhoods. If there are more police interactions there. Exactly. They're proving their own point, or they're proving my point. This means there's more police surveillance in general and more instances of new white residents calling law enforcement on people of color for perceived misdemeanors. We're not talking about misdemeanors. We're talking about violent crime. Almost all uses of police force, both justified and unjustified, almost all are in responses to violent crime. Or even the ones that aren't are in neighborhoods where violent crime is most likely to occur. So the fact that they cleverly switch in misdemeanors, that's not what we're talking about. They say noise complaints, behaving suspiciously. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking rape, homicide, aggravated assault. More crimes being attributed to the black and Latinx, they say Latinx, that's great, people is more reflective of excessive police presence and white people making calls, not proof that people of color actually commit crimes more frequently. That's absolute nonsense. The majority of people that are calling the police for violent crimes in the black community, saying there are black offenders, are black! This is the same mentality that says the problem's not that there's the reason that there's so much violent crime in these communities is because the police were there. If we pull the police out, then there wouldn't be violent crimes. Yet how come it is every time we try to do that, we could look at Ferguson, violent crimes shoot through the roof. That's what happened in the autonomous zone in Seattle. That's what we see happening in Chicago right now. It's what we see happening in New York right now. Wait a minute, if police are the problem, wouldn't violence be going down when police pulled out? Next, what about black on black crime? Derailing, they say. Okay. It's not derailing. Let's see what they say, though. We're discussing racism, and black people don't kill each other because they're black, firstly. How do you know? I'd assume that's probably a true statement, but what's the relevance of that point? So black lives only matter if they're killed in an act of perceived racism? That's nonsense. But it is an admission by them. We only care about black lives that were killed by racism. Of course, they overgeneralize what racism is. So, sorry, if you're one of the 7,000 blacks that were killed last year, or you're their family that were killed by other blacks, sorry, this movement doesn't care. At least they're finally admitting it. Secondly, if you compare white and black neighborhoods with similar income levels, you see similar rates of crime. That's partially true. But you also see similar rates of violent interaction with the police. Again, they're proving my point. Yes, you're right. It's not about the ethnicity necessarily. It's about poor people. Absolutely correct. So tell me again, if poor people are 2.5 more times likely to be shot, including poor whites, which studies have bore out over and over, when it comes to being unarmed, you're more likely to be shot by the cops if you're white than if you're black. So why is this about racism again? But systemic economic inequality is a factor that people forget. So if you use comparisons that put together both wealthy and upper income class neighborhoods that are predominantly white and middle low income neighborhoods that have more people of color, it skews the data. That's not true. We're talking about black on black crime here. The argument is, if your focus is black lives, shouldn't we be concerned about all black lives that have been lost tragically? So why do you only care about the 15 unarmed blacks that were killed last year and not the 7,000 that were killed? Well, it's because you could make a point, a political point. One, you could say, aha, this proves racism. But the other, you can't say that. So you ignore the overwhelming amount of black deaths that actually occur. Now, when it comes to systemic inequality and the idea of comparing high-income neighborhoods with high-income whites with low-income blacks, absolutely. But again, that's because we're talking about income levels. If you look at low-income whites and compare them to low-income blacks, the numbers start to be far more similar. Poor people commit more crimes because of economic insecurity. It leads to those crimes. But that it's true in general. But again, there's this incredible lack of agency we give to someone. So it's almost like we're saying, hey, to the 7,000 blacks that committed homicide against other blacks last year, it's not your fault, you're poor. I'm sorry, that just doesn't float. There is something to be said statistically about poor people committing more crime. Totally get that. But it just seems that they're going overboard to say that, oh, well, then that explains everything. That's not the case. It just so happens black people are still at economic disadvantage because of the enduring consequences of America's racism throughout history. That's not true. There's no definitive proof of that. That could be a factor, but why are things worse off in the black community 70 years after the civil rights movement if slavery and Jim Crow were the reason? Could it be that the policies of the Democrats that have controlled these, policies of the war on poverty that encouraged single motherhood, that have led to 75% of blacks being born without fathers? Policies that pumped money in and said that people were victims and that they didn't have to get an education. A culture that has discouraged education. A culture that's encouraged gang violence. A culture that's encouraged an animosity with the police. And don't get me wrong, there's also been animosity fostered from police to these communities. So both sides need to work on this. I'm not saying it's just their fault. But again, just like the stats we did about crime, they just say, racism. Economic disparity must be racism. There's no proof for that whatsoever. Next, what about gun violence in black neighborhoods like Chicago? Derailing, they say. They say basically just the answer above. Well, I already answered that. They say it's not directly related to this conversation. Well, yeah, no kidding. That's the point, right? Crap. What's going on here? Next, if people just followed the law, they'd be fine. A, whether or not someone committed a crime does not mean they deserve to be killed. Totally agree. Cops are not judge, jury, and executioner. I agree. So again, remember what we're talking about. 15 unarmed blacks last year killed. Many of which they were attacking with physical violence police officers when they were shot and killed. But yeah, sure. I guess we could talk about those 15. Let's just put it in perspective. B, innocent people have been killed for fitting a description or for misdemeanors. That's true. Again, but how many? or by accident, or because a cop felt like it and didn't fear repercussions. That's not true. Cops face repercussions. They should face more. I do think that there needs to be more accountability for police, so that's something we agree on. But again, let's put this in perspective. 15 unarmed blacks killed last year, compared to 7,000 and some odd that were killed from black-on-black crime. They talk about this, they act like this is some problem that's happening every day. Cops are just out there shooting unarmed blacks just because they feel like it. It's not true. The numbers don't back that up. Rarely is justice served, they say. And see, the law and the system protects white people in ways it does not protect black people, indigenous people, or people of color. That's not true. Again, they admitted above, when you start to look at poor whites, the numbers become very similar with poor blacks. Next, white privilege isn't real. It's not. Well, it is, but so is black privilege, I guess is the best answer. Next, they say, consider Brock Turner. I don't even know who that is. Also consider, white shooters are miraculously apprehended safely. Not true. Unarmed whites are more likely to be shot than unarmed blacks. Next, yet unarmed black people were killed with an alarming frequency. Not true. It was 15 last year. Look, there's not enough space here, but the info on this guide indicates some ways white privilege is real. In essence, white is seen as the default normal. That's not white privilege. That's the same privilege that comes with being in the majority in every country in the history of the world. And the idea that somehow that means white people are uniquely evil or racist or have some sort of privilege is total nonsense. If I go to Zaire, do I still have white privilege? If I go to China, do I still have white privilege? And how exactly do we codify? What is that like? I hear this all the time. You don't know what it's like to walk into Walmart and not have anyone that looks like you. Okay. Maybe? Is it that horrible? Are you really that focused on it? It's nonsense. White people often receive benefit of the doubt in ways people of color don't because of the stereotypes and lack of representation in media. Absolute garbage and nonsense. Every single institution, especially the media, can't wait to fall all over themselves, declaring Black Lives Matter and supporting them, downplaying riots. Can you show me an example of when a white person's been shot that's been attacking police that you saw the media fawn over like they did Richard, the gentleman in Atlanta? Of course not. Again, I tell you, this is how powerful this movement is. They're literally claiming the media is against them. It's nonsense. They have all of the institutional power and then claim we don't have institutional power. The institutions are against us. It's because of centuries of history rooted in racism and oppression. White people have advantages in systemic power that black people don't. It's such a broad overgeneralization. We can see now that there are, for example, blacks are 47 times more likely to use physical violence against whites, at least in 2018. Yet the entire cultural narrative is whites are abusive to blacks. So if all of these institutions are so anti-black, why are they covering that in that way? You can't even publicly disagree with Black Lives Matter or you risk losing your job. Now, I apologize. I have to get back to Facebook because I didn't realize. Oh, boy. Maybe I'll get to the rest of that. All right. Is the rest here? This is just one of three. 2 of 3. Let's do it. View image. Zoom it in. Next, many of the people killed had criminal histories. Again, they're saying all of these comments mean you're a racist. How is that racist? How are any of these comments racist? If you don't admit you have white privilege, then you're racist. Do you see how they stack the game against you? Many of the people killed had criminal histories. That doesn't matter and isn't relevant to the moment a cop is making an arrest. Agreed. In general. Right? So, for example, I wasn't a big fan of people saying, well, George Floyd was this violent thug. Maybe if you're saying that to say we shouldn't memorialize him or make him a saint, I get that. But that doesn't mean he deserved to die. So I agree with that point. A past criminal record, which is often unknown, which is also could be true. Now, in the case of the Atlanta shooting, it was known. But they're right. Not every instance where a cop kills a black person did they know the criminal history. I'll agree with that. It doesn't justify the use of excessive force or murder, especially if someone is subdued. I agree. If they're subdued, it doesn't justify that. Absolutely agree. Now, it does warrant, though, if you know a particular individual has a violent history, it does warrant you being more on edge. But that doesn't mean that you're justified to just shoot and murder them. So, yeah, I agree with that. Again, we're talking 15 unarmed blacks that were shot last year, and they haven't argued that even one of them was an unjustified shoot. Cops are not judge, jury, and executioner. Also, many of the cops who are killing people have prior on-the-job offenses or murders on their record. I don't know about murders. There are very few cops, I think, that murdered someone that are still on the force and have that scrubbed from the record. But I do think that we could do better of sharing when people have marks on their record that are police officers and they're still on duty. This should be your actual point of concern. That is a point of concern. Everyone agreed that the death of George Floyd was horrendous. We agreed that policy should change. We agreed that that officer should be held accountable. So yes, that is a point of concern. It's you pretending that we don't think it's a point of concern. Of course we do. You say it's racist to even bring this stuff up. Next, now we're getting into the good stuff. Here's the next racist point. Why can't they peacefully protest in a way that doesn't disturb anyone? A, how would you feel about Colin Kaepernick? I think he's a terrible person that antagonized the police and pushed forth a false race narrative that caused racial division and led to situations like anger that led to these riots. That's how I feel about him. How is that responsive to why you shouldn't riot? Are you trying to make the claim, well, Kaepernick tried to peacefully protest? Of course he did, and he was allowed, and a private business was allowed to fire him, and people were allowed to speak up and say, I find this protest, which remember, was originally his statement was, I will not stand for the flag of a racist country. That's what he said. So yeah, that PO'd a lot of people, but he absolutely had the right to do it. The 49ers had the right to fire him. The NFL had the right to not win him there. All of that's true. And is your argument because he was fired? Well, that's why we have to have riots. If so, you're a psychopath. B, the point of protesting is to create sustained disruptions to the status quo, forcing people in power to create change. That has worked multiple times throughout history. So here they have it. They're admitting, yes, the violence is good because we think the violence intimidates people into making changes. So we could dispense with that myth now, right? Oh, no, we're not. It's peaceful protesters. We don't want the violence. Here we have Black Lives Matter admitting, no, the violence is good. That's what leads to actual change. The violence might lead to actual short-term change, but it might also lead to reciprocal violence. How couldn't the police make the same argument, for example, to the black community? Police could say, geez, it looks like the black community, particularly in these inner city places, are committing disproportionately the amounts of violent crimes than other communities. In fact, I believe that police were 8 times more likely to be killed, or was it 87 times more likely? It's a huge number. More likely to be killed on the line of duty than they are to kill an unarmed black. And disproportionately, those deaths come from members of the black community. So would police be able to say, well, hey, we need to have a violent protest against black people in order to have actual change? Would that be justified? Of course not. Once you start saying, hey, if you're unhappy with the status quo, violence is a justified way to go about it, you then open that up to all of the people that disagree with you politically doing the exact same thing. So, for example, I could right now correctly point out that all the institutions are defending Black Lives Matter. They're defending the erasing of the United States history. They're defending riots and things like that. They're defending canceling people that speak up against the message of Black Lives Matter. That's almost every institution. So does that mean that someone like me would be justified in using violence to change that? Of course not. See, they only look at things of what benefits me. If it benefits me, then yes, violence is justified. They don't mind being hypocrites. If conservatives would go out and take 6 city blocks and use violence, or they would use violence to intimidate people from going to a Joe Biden rally, these people would be the first ones screaming. But they don't mind being hypocrites. They don't hold themselves to the same standard. So for them, violence is totally justified. And again, this adds up with the people that I debated that admitted to me that a lot of the reason for the violence was to remove Donald Trump. So nice to see them finally admit it. C, The protests remain peaceful unless or until the cops deliberately use tear gas and non-lethal bullets that can maim and kill. That is absolutely ridiculous. That is a lie. I could show you video after video of shop owners getting the crap beat out of them. This was an argument that I had in my debate when we did that 8-person debate. Think about what they're saying here, okay? I just want you to run through this mental exercise. So picture, for example, the woman in Rochester, I believe it was. An old man and woman. And they beat this woman with a 2x4, beat her to the ground, beat the husband screaming, "Stop hitting my wife!" Horrible. Or the guy in Dallas that was murdered, the shop owner. Or the Dorn, the security guard that was a black cop that was murdered. Take any of those you want, right? Think about those incidents while I go through this scenario. So, the people that murdered those people or beat them, right? They showed up, they're just peaceful protesters. All of a sudden, tear gas gets shot, and they say, I think I'm going to rob some TVs and shoot the security guard that's in the way. That's what this argument is. There wouldn't have been this violence if there wasn't tear gas. It's so stupid, it's beyond comprehension. There wasn't any tear gas in the Seattle Autonomous Zone. How come there was a guy murdered there? What happened? I thought it was all the police. So stupid. Next, but the rioting and looting. So keep in mind, they're saying, let's go back to the top here. These are racist talking points. So if you're upset with the rioting and looting, that's racism. Let's see what they say. The majority of protests are entirely peaceful. Well, that's sort of irrelevant, isn't it? By a far greater magnitude, the majority of police are good. That doesn't stop you from rioting about it. Yes, I will agree with you. For example, my small town, Clarion, had a protest. It was peaceful. There are small towns all around the country that have had peaceful protests. A lot of cities have had peaceful protests. But that's not the problem. Just like you can't say, hey, the majority of cops never kill anyone, so therefore no use talking about the ones that do. They'd say that's ridiculous. The ones that kill people are exactly the ones we should be talking about. The same with the rioting. And let's not act like the riots are rare. They're in D.C. tonight rioting again, removing statues. Others are peaceful until the cops turn on them. Already argued about that. That can lead to others taking advantage with chaos and looting, often detracting from the goals of the movement. They just said above that violence was justified. Did you see that? B, the point of protesting is to create sustained disruptions to the status quo, forcing people in power to create change. Now they're saying, well, we're not endorsing the rioting. Small business shouldn't be destroyed, and there's a problem with racism and police brutality that needs to be addressed. Can and must coincide. Well, I'm glad that you're saying small businesses shouldn't be destroyed now. What about police precincts? Don't focus on the property loss at the expense of the repeated loss of lives that have been occurring for years. Again, all of the riots and buildings that have been burnt down, predominantly in black neighborhoods, they say don't focus on that. Focus on this rash of unarmed blacks that have been killed. 15 last year. But not the 7,000. They don't want to focus on the 7,000. They already told you that. We're not concerned about the 7,000 homicide victims of black on black crime. Don't care about that. If you allow those few instances, it's a whole magnitude, to direct your attention away from the reasons for the protest, you're playing right into the hands of those trying to change the topic. The media, that's a lie. The media is on board with them. The police and the politicians, almost no politicians disagreeing with them, who prefer to keep the status quo. If you're primarily seeing select news of property damage, but no evidence of hours of peace and repeated violence, ask yourself why. Well, let me turn that question to you, Mr. Black Lives Matter. If you're primarily just seeing instances of police with black incidents, ask yourself why. What about the fact that there are more incidences of the police attacking whites or shooting whites or killing whites? What about the fact that the majority of police aren't doing those sorts of things? The cognitive dissonance is unbelievable. The reason we're seeing so many riots and stuff is because there's so many riots. And the media, primarily, is doing everything they can not to cover it. But again, they're actually acting like the media is against them. Next, how come other races don't protest? Derailing, they say. A, they probably do or did and you're just not aware of it. Yes, exactly. Because the media doesn't foster that division with the other races. Yep, thanks for proving the point. B, if they did now, would you personally actually be listening to them or dismiss them? I think we would listen to anyone who said, hey, police violence needs to stop. We need to do a better job with it. Of course, everyone was on board with that. C, bringing this up perpetuates the model minority myth, which is the idea that some minorities have achieved higher success and are better because they keep their heads down and work hard. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Again, this is them making the argument. You can't look at the actual data. You can't look at it. And if you say, well, the Hispanic community is not rioting, well, you can't say that because that perpetuates the myth that, what again? The Hispanic community is not rioting? It's so dumb. It's erasure that encourages people not to speak out against injustice and also pits minorities against each other. Oh, so when they say other race, they don't mean whites, only other minorities. Next, white people have been oppressed too. Derailing. Are white people oppressed in Western societies right now because of their race? Yes. For example, blacks are 47 times more likely to commit violence against whites, but our entire establishment pretends that the argument goes the other way. Now, they say, well, they're wrong. Can white people be oppressed in other ways unrelated to their skin color? Yes, but they could also be oppressed in ways related to their skin color, such as the people pulling down statues that are saying kill whitey, the people that are saying end white fragility, defund white people, reparations, arguments. We actually have affirmative action. We actually have laws that literally oppress white people based on their skin color. We have the governor of Kentucky saying, I'm going to make sure all poor people have health insurance. Oh, but just the poor blacks. So we actually have current institutional laws or suggestion for laws that directly harm white people. Show me the law that does that to any other race. Well, of course, affirmative action also screws over Asian Americans. Of course, but that's a different conversation. Racial oppression is currently what we're discussing. Again, you only care about this one issue because it's the issue that you could use for power. You don't care about, you're focused on 15 deaths, police killing 15 unarmed blacks instead of the 7,000. You admitted you don't care about them because you can't blame that on racism. Now, I'm sure if you asked any objective person in the black community, I'm sure they wouldn't want any black homicides. I don't want any black homicides at all. But if you had to choose to focus on one, 7,000 people a year being murdered by other blacks, or 15 unarmed blacks, many of which were involved in violence against the police, being killed, I would say I would much rather focus on the 7,000, but you're completely opposite. Next, I don't see color. That's racism according to them if you say that. You may mean well by saying this, but what you're actually doing is invalidating the experience of anyone who isn't white. Again, more postmodernist garbage. Well, I feel you do see color, so it doesn't matter what the truth is. Absolute garbage. You can't discuss and change problems if you refuse to acknowledge they exist in the first place, nor can you support those whose skin color and culture is different from yours. This argument is incredibly dangerous. You don't know how I feel because you don't look like me. Well, I could say the same thing to anyone. And once we say that, again, the governor of Pennsylvania, he was asked for a message of unity by a partner of mine, Todd Bartley, who does my radio show with me. And Governor Tom Wolf said, here was what he said, a message of unity for Pennsylvania. He said there are two Pennsylvanias, one for white people and one for black people. Does that sound unifying to you? When you say that you can't understand people if you don't share the same skin color or same gender as them, you make dialogue impossible. When you make dialogue impossible, violence is inevitable. But in a society filled with microaggressions, yeah, and overt racism and injustice, we are not all equal. We must listen to each other's experiences. Do you listen to someone's experience if they're considered part of the majority? Would you listen to someone say, I would like to speak as a man? You don't understand what it's like to be a man? Would you listen to someone say, I'd like to speak as a white person or an Asian person? Of course not. So please, cut with the crap. It's only subjective experiences only matter if there are subjective experiences that enhance your power. For example, when Candace Owen talks about her subjective experience as a black woman, no one cares on the left. They think she's a race traitor. They use racial slurs to her. So you're only concerned about subjective experiences that agree with your acquisition of power. We also can't forget to value the things that make us unique or celebrate the beauty and diversity. Then why are you cheering for segregation of things like hospitals and schools? Especially when those distances are often used to perpetuate oppression. Agreed. They're encouraging a race war right now. You truly need to see color to hear people's different stories. The more we focus on race, the worse things become. Every single time. Race relations were at an all-time high in this country before Obama came in and tried to make everything about race. Oh my God, let's get through this. That's what happens when you promise people to go through. Next racist talking point, Blue Lives Matter. Derailing, they say. Being a cop is a choice, being black isn't. True, but saying that someone's life doesn't have value for a profession seems almost as heinous as saying that it doesn't have value because of a color. White people can stop being cops by simply taking off their uniform for the day or removing themselves from danger. Well, that ignores the fact that actually studies show that black and Hispanic officers are more likely to discharge their weapons, including against black suspects. So strange choice by saying white people can stop being cops. What about black cops? And just because they can stop being a cop if they remove the uniform, there is some truth to that. I will admit, there seems to be something slightly more heinous about disliking someone from their skin color as opposed to disliking someone for their profession. But both are heinous. Black people can't stop being black or experiencing the repercussions of racism. They can stop experiencing the repercussions of racism. All of us deal with difficulties in our lives. If you constantly say, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, then those repercussions will constantly be an albatross around your neck. Cops getting hurt or killed while on the clock is an occupational hazard they signed up for. That's a ridiculous point, though, because you're directly targeting violence against police officers. And to act like, I just don't understand. Well, it's just they chose to be a cop, so we can't focus on the violence directed towards them. That's why you think, or that's why you're claiming then, that any violence from a cop is because of racism. Because you're unwilling to look at the whole story. If you're a cop and you're going into these communities and constantly being physically attacked, you're more likely to respond with physical violence. If you say, well, I don't care about the cop getting attacked, he should just quit if he doesn't like it, that's insane. Not all cops brutalize, kill people, it's just a few bad ones. The ones who do kill and brutalize rarely face true consequences. Okay, time out here. Let's apply the same type of argument to the riots. So instead of not all cops brutalize, it's just a few. They said, not every protester is peaceful, it's just a few, or not every protester is violent, it's just a few that are. I could say, well, the ones that do are brutal and rarely face consequences, which is exactly the truth of the riots we're seeing. Hardly anyone's facing consequences. When someone says there are no good cops, it doesn't mean no good person has ever become a cop. What it does mean is that American policing is set up as a system that doesn't allow for what we would expect a good cop to be. That is absolutely insanely wrong. So they're literally saying there are no good cops. They're saying you might be a good person, you might then get into the police force, but by the very nature of what a cop is in this country, you can't be a good cop. That's insane. And then you wonder why there's an antagonistic relationship. Again, they say it's everyone else dividing people. They're literally saying here there are no good cops. The supposed good cops are complicit in supporting a system that lets the worst of them get away with horrible things. I could say the same thing with the protesters. They're complicit in a system that encourages beating people, looting, and more. Remember, 15 unarmed blacks killed last year. Over 20 people have been killed as a result of these riots. So if we're just looking at the raw numbers, the riots are actually responsible for more deaths than cops that killed unarmed blacks. And untold property destruction, people losing their livelihood, people just being physically injured or emotionally injured. We're just talking about the deaths. This is called the blue wall of silence. Look, we do need to have more accountability for cops that do bad actions. But things were getting better. The revolution is making because they don't look at things in proportion, they make you feel like, oh my God, this is happening everywhere. It's not. It's getting better every year. And to then revolt and remove the entire society and encourage things like segregation and removal of prisons and police and destroying capitalism is going to make things worse. And any cops that do try to speak out against corruption are punished for it. For example, read about Adrian Schoolcraft. The problem isn't a few bad apples, but the whole tree. It's not true. The entirety of law enforcement isn't terrible. There are laws I'd like to see removed. I don't agree with the war on drugs. I think that things like asset forfeiture is ridiculous. So there are things that we could work together to improve policing. But when you make it racial, Now you're unable to solve the problem because you're focusing on a problem that doesn't exist. You're pretending that cops for racist reason are killing scores of unarmed black men. That's just not true. So when that's the problem that you're identifying, you'll never get to a real solution. Whereas someone like me could come together with you and say, I agree there are things about policing that needs to change. But when you start off the foot of there are no good cops, the entire system needs to be removed, then it kills the ability to have real world solutions. Why isn't anyone talking about many good things cops do? Derailing, they say. People do all the time in feel-good stories. But it's difficult. Right now, the police have to be the most hated by the institutions and millions of people in this country. Police has to be the most hated profession. But it's difficult to separate genuine good from what's often well-timed cop propaganda that tries to get people to stop speaking out or delegitimize voices for change by implying any problems are about individual cops rather than the system. Isn't that exactly what Black Lives Matter is doing? When you point out their leaders that say, remove images of Jesus Christ because it's white supremacy, burn down cop precincts, riot, loot, defund white people, all white people are racist, abolish prisons, abolish the police. We hear this over and abolish capitalism over and over and over and over from Black Lives Matter. And the argument's always, oh, that's just a few bad apples. No. They don't speak for the whole movement. Yet here we are. That's exactly the same type of argumentation they use against the police. Recently and frequently, cops kneeling for photo ops at protests have gone viral. But then later that day, those same cops used tear gas on violence on protesters. Because most of the time, those protesters are getting violent. What should they do? Allow the violence to perpetuate? Of course, it's impossible to have this conversation with whoever wrote this because they argue the violence doesn't exist until the cops use the tear gas, which is asinine. Also, some of the cops go viral for good deeds may have a history of violence on their records. Bottom line, it's difficult and harmful to praise people who are part of such a broken system. Well, there you go. We can't talk about good deeds cops do because the entire system of police is evil. Pure, utter nonsense. Again, if you put the shoe on the other foot and said, well then fine, we're going to say that about Black Lives Matter. The system's so corrupt, leadership of it's providing so insane policies that we can't praise anything anyone in that movement would ever do. Cops are human too. Are they expected to do nothing while getting screamed at? Yeah, actually. Utter stupidity. These are the same people that are against microaggressions. So you saying something like, hey, how's your day? Oh, I'm sorry, that's a microaggression. Are you saying that because I'm black? That's what they get offended at. But they think that cops, they should be able to sit there and scream. Yeah, you have to deal with it. You see? It's always one set of rules for them, another set for everyone else. If a customer service people can't take abuse, the protectors of society should be able to. Being a cop is a high-pressure job, and they need to have the mental fortitude to not allow emotions to cloud their judgment. In general, that's true, but they're also human. We understand that. Things like anger management training, background checks on records of violence, mental wellness checks, etc. are the bare minimum that should be happening, but nor would it be enough. Yet you want to defund the police. So you're admitting more training, more background checks, more mental wellness, yet less money to do all of those things. Again, proving that the very solutions you're offering would make the problem worse. Here we go. Again, let's look. Rebuttals for racist talking points. So all these talking points are racist. So here's the last one. What's the solution? Do you hear that? If you ask someone in Black Lives Matter, well, what do you think's the solution? You've just acted in a racist way. That's a racist question. Do you see how ridiculous this is? What's the solution? You ready? Defund and or abolish the police. There you go. There it is, in black and white. Over and over they tell us, but the media and the Democrats say, oh, no, that's not what they mean. That's not what they mean. Don't believe them. We're supposed to believe anytime they say anything about their subjective feelings about how the country's so racist to them, but when they actually clearly speak and say, we want to abolish the police, now we're not supposed to believe them. At some point we have to say, this is what they're calling for. They say, now that sounds scary if you've never heard it before, but allow me to quote the people who know what they're talking about. I'm assuming whoever they're about to quote does not know what they're talking about, because every study shows us that when you abolish police, violence incredibly skyrockets. We see it happening right now. How's that autonomous zone working out in Seattle? Essentially, we're currently asking cops to solve too many of the world's problems, meaning at best they're ineffective or at worst harmful. So we're talking about a gradual process of strategically reallocating resources, funding, and responsibility away from police towards community-based models of safety, support, and prevention. How's the community-based model going to handle the 7,000 homicides that occurred last year of black-on-black crime? Anyone? The people who respond to crises in our community should be people who are best equipped to deal with those crises. Agreed. So if you're responding to violent crime, which occurs disproportionately in black neighborhoods, you should have the ability to respond against violence. They're going to send a social worker, though. Rather than strangers armed with guns, we want to create a space for more mental health service providers, social workers, victim survivor advocates, religious leaders, etc., all the people who make up the fabric of community, to look out for one another. This hippie nonsense will not work. And that implies that there can't be corruption in social workers. Go watch that documentary, the trial of Gabriel Menendez or something like that. It's incredible. It's on Netflix. It's one of the most disturbing things you ever see. And it's about these parents who took this 7, 8-year-old boy and beat him in ways that are horrific, locked him under a sink, and killed the boy. And social workers again and again and again and again and again showed up to this house and gave it the green light. I work in a home healthcare field with people with developmental disabilities. I've seen people that are terrible in this field. So the idea of, if we just take a gun away, then nothing bad will happen, it'll be all good people, is ridiculous. And you're ignoring how violent communities can be. Again, these are people that really believe that there would be no violence if there were no police. How's that autonomous zone working out? Most of the time it happens when someone has been able to meet their basic needs through other means. By shifting money away from the police and towards these services that meet these needs, we'll be able to get to a place we won't need to rob banks. That's ridiculous. What about rape, for example? Hey, if we just shift community needs, we'll get to a place where we don't need to rape. If someone said that to you, you would say, you're a psychopath, get out of my face. You don't need to rape. You don't need to rob banks. The idea that these looters are just stealing stuff because they desperately need food is a joke. You're not stealing big screen TVs because you couldn't afford lunch earlier in the day. All lives matter can't matter until black lives do. Absolute nonsense. How many people I still got with me? 25. So sorry I haven't been looking at the chat. Thank you, Persian, on Periscope. Says, I'm so sad with my 2 viewers. Here's the thing, right? That's a good point that Persian makes here. So currently on all platforms, I have 25 viewers. So Persian makes fun of me because I don't have many viewers. So the argument that Persian's making here implicitly is, my feelings must be hurt because I don't have many viewers. When in truth, the objective facts don't care about my feelings. So 1, my feelings aren't hurt. But 2, even if they were, it doesn't do anything to dispute the actual facts that I've been outlining tonight. But of course, that's what people like you would like to say. Let's go through. So, I don't know. I'll just ask people in the chat. Was that helpful? Do people think I did a decent job? That was the first time I read through that. I hope I did a decent job rebutting the nonsense that comes out of these Black Lives Matter people. And I'll be willing to debate them over and over again, especially once I get my computer and I don't have to worry about lag. We'll talk about it. And I think you could judge for yourself. When I debate those people, I think I do pretty well. I don't mind the trolls at all, Carvo. They just prove my point. So, thank you, Frank. So, in conclusion, what was tonight about? I wanted to go through the actual data because the arguments that justify the riots and the revolution are that we could just look at small slices of data and that proves racism. That's not true. When you look at the actual data that we have, it proves that the narrative that's being pushed by Black Lives Matter is a lie. And it shows that it's just a power grab. That's what they're after. Let me... So, and I hope that I went through the talking point. Don't you think it's funny? Can you imagine me coming up here and giving you a set of talking points? Of course not. But that's what these people do. Oh, you have to have talking points against racists. And they even gaslight right out of... They assume anyone who's questioning them must be a racist. Absolute nonsense. I want to briefly... I mentioned this last night, but I want to briefly talk about it again. Because it goes into what I'm saying here with this data. Cancel culture and the way they're employing it right now, what they've done is they've set it up so the sin is something that almost everyone's committed. Right? So, for example, Stevie Ray Vaughan's statue got defaced. For those of you who don't know, fantastic blues musician, like rock and blues musician. What did he do? Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Yes, we could say there are things that they've all done. Aunt Jemima? Uncle Ben? Anyone who's ever told a joke that's off color. Anyone who's ever had a microaggression. They make the sin, if you're white, you've committed original sin. They make the sin that they say you could be canceled if you've committed this sin. And then they make that sin something that's either nebulous or that everyone's committed. And then they could selectively apply when they want to cancel you. Ironically, it's very similar to what they're complaining about with the police. For example, I found this out once in my life. I was charged with disorderly conduct because I was at a club watching a band and there was a fight. I wasn't involved in it, but I was drunk. I went up. Tried to order another beer. They took my money, refused to give me a beer, wouldn't give my money back. I got arrested for disorderly conduct. I said I didn't commit disorderly conduct when I was talking to the cop at the station. So the cop that arrested me was a jerk. The cop at the station was cool. He said, yes, you did. And I was like, no, I didn't do anything. And he's like, go ahead, look up the statute in the Pennsylvania Criminal Justice Code. Basically, disorderly conduct in layman's term is anything that any other member of the community could have been annoyed by. He's like, it's purposely written so that it's a catch-all. And that type of stuff with the police needs to be changed. It's not racial. It's just a terrible thing. And we do need to change that. But isn't that exactly what they're doing with this cancel culture? They make it so everyone's guilty and you have to bow to them for forgiveness. And then they could arbitrarily say, you're canceled, you're canceled. So that's how we see things like, for example, has Yale changed their name? But wait a minute. Wasn't it named after a slaveholder? Oh, well, that's a lefty institution. They don't care. What about the name Democrat? Wasn't that the name of the party of slavery? Why did they keep the same name? If they've changed, change your name, right? What about the donkey? Wasn't that the Democratic symbol under Jim Crow? Where's the calls to change it? What about Trudeau? What about Ralph Northam? Now, I don't want them to lose their jobs over blackface, but by the standards set forth by the woke crowd that's canceling everyone. And so we see all of these discrepancies. Wait a minute. Why is it that people you politically don't like, you parse every single thing they do and say they must be canceled? But when people that you do align with politically do worse things, no consequence for them. And the reason is, it's not about tearing down Confederate statues. It's not about actually going after people that have said racially insensitive things. It is power. It is destruction of history. That's why they're now, and they're advancing. They're going to keep doing it until finally pressure's put back. Now Sean King from Black Lives Matter is saying, go into churches. Take down painted glass windows that have an image of Jesus on them. That's white supremacist. This is insane. And they'll get away with it too. Yeah, but Jimmy Kimmel didn't apologize, JoJo. So, all right. It was a data-driven episode. I hope you all liked it. I might cut that little part. You go ahead, Frank. I'll be heading out soon anyways. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. So, yeah, I hope you don't mind that I did. Normally I'm kind of riffing more than having specific things like that I'm going on. But I hope that you found it interesting and entertaining. If I could make a quick comment. So on Twitch last night, someone donated $10,000 to me. And as you may have guessed, it wasn't real. But I am still taking donations. I'm trying to raise $1,200. So I think of what I've received so far, I've got about $300 from great people. Ford Nation's one of the ones. Thank you so much, Ford. I've had some other great people that have donated money to me. So I'm still about $900 away from the new computer. It should cut way down on the lag. It should allow me to do these videos. Right now, it's almost impossible for me to have a guest and live stream at the same time, particularly if I have video. If you go back and watch the video I did with Milo before this, there was a lot of lag on it, and I couldn't show the video because the lag's so bad. So I'm trying to raise money for that computer. I bought the computer and it's coming, but my wife's going to kill me because we're pregnant for the first time and she says I shouldn't have spent that money. So I'm trying to raise money. So anybody who would like to donate money to me, I would very much appreciate. You could give me lemons on D Live. You can give me super chats on YouTube. You could donate to my Patreon and PayPal, which I'll put up here. Or if you prefer and you don't like any of those services, email me at rob.nor@gmail.com and I could give out like my post office address or something like that. But I'll put up some of those links here before I go. How's everyone doing tonight? I feel bad that I spent less time on the chat tonight than even I usually do. So I'm sorry about that. So how's everyone doing? I hope everyone's doing good. I really wanted to get to that data because I'm just tired of just colluding for that computer. Yeah, as long as I scream Black Lives Matter, no problem, right? So there's my PayPal and Patreon. Here's my email. Unfortunately, no. I don't believe in violence or the taking of other people's property. So I will not be looting for a new computer. Now, let me say, as I always say, if you can't donate, please don't think that I think any less of you. For example, a couple friends. Thank you, Whoopsie. I really appreciate it. Means a lot. Thank you so much. As I told you, one of my favorite websites is Above Top Secret. It looks to be collapsing financially. I'd love to be able to help, but I live paycheck to paycheck. I make about $15 an hour. Thank you. My first Father's Day. Thank you so much. I only make about $15 an hour. I'm working like 80, 90 hours a week just trying to make ends meet, get ready for the baby and things like that. So I know how it feels. There are a bunch of websites and content creators that I would like to donate to, and I just can't. So if you can't donate, no problem whatsoever, particularly after this COVID nonsense. I know people are wiped out. So please don't think that you have to donate. If you have a better place to put the money, absolutely do that. I'm going to do this show no matter what. It doesn't matter if I ever get a dime. If I'm using crappy old equipment, I'll get my message out there to you somehow. You might not be able to see the full beautifulness of my complexion as well as you otherwise would. I might sound a bit laggy, but I'll be here, darn it. Guarantee. So, oh yeah, my birthday is July 4th. It'll be coming up. For those of you who don't know, JoJo's my brother. Thank you again, Whoopsie. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who donated. If you want to help and you can't donate, I recommend liking and subscribing, obviously. And if you want to share videos, maybe share the smaller videos I do that are usually about 2 to 3 minutes, because they're probably easier to watch than, me rambling on for an hour and a half about Department of Justice statistics, No, I don't have a baby. I will be a first-time father, and the baby will be due right at the end of the year, right at the beginning of January. So, currently not a father, prospective father, I guess. I still feel like I'm a father. So, alrighty. So, scheduling note, I'll be doing this again tomorrow night around 10:30 Eastern Time p.m. So tune in for that. If you could recommend me some other people, I'll probably just be news of the day. Who knows what statues were tore down in Washington while I was doing the live stream. So thank you, Whoopsie. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. I'm trying. Let me tell you just real quick why I think my voice is important and all of your voices and everyone. Thank you, Hemp Bear. I appreciate it. Tucker, again, as far as I'm concerned, I don't watch almost any mainstream media. I don't have cable. I watch Tucker online when I can. That's about the only one I watch. He's the only one I think's worthwhile. Maybe you know some others, but at least for me, that's the only one I know that's worthwhile. And I think he's been spot on in a lot of this. Don't agree with everything he says, but I think that one of the things that he's been hammering home, that I've been hammering for years, but particularly in the past 4 months here, is Republican leadership is doing nothing for us. Nothing. Now, I've criticized Trump a lot in this show. And I still will in the future. But at least he's speaking up for the country. Where's the rest of the Republican leadership? Do we have to wait until there are lynchings of police officers and people based on their skin color before they stand up and say something? The truth is we can't wait for them anymore. That's why I'm running for Congress in 2022, or governor. I haven't decided. Kitty Lighthouse on Faircom says, "Hi, I'm from Canada. Heard folks are getting COVID from farts. Is that true?" I don't know. Who knows? I heard that rumor. I would say that's garbage, but I don't know. But great question. So yeah, we need people that will stand up. All of you should run for local office, run for Congress, do whatever you can, because it's clear that the bums we keep voting for don't care about us. They don't care at all. They only care about keeping their jobs. They're afraid of being called racist. I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart, if there's one thing that comes across on this show from me, I hope it's this. Not that I'm the most handsome, though I probably am. Not that I'm the hardest working, though, let's be honest. I do not have the Bill of Rights on my wall. I do carry a pocket Constitution with me, though. And I do have a fancy Bill of Rights at home, but I'm at work right now, so it's not my great looks. It's not my great intelligence. It's not even my impeccable sense of humor. The one thing that I hope comes across in all seriousness is I am who I am. I am authentic. I'm not going to just, my side never does anything wrong. I'm a Trump supporter, so I'll never criticize Trump, or I'm pretending to be something I'm not. I have thousands of hours of stuff on here, and from day one to day now, I am who I am. And I hope that comes across. And I'm telling you, I am not a racist. Find anything remotely on my channel. I'm deeply concerned about the problems that occur in inner city communities, predominantly black communities. Deeply concerned. I think that it's been a failure of this country and both parties that things have gotten so bad. I just have a different solution. I think focusing on race always makes things worse. I think the war on poverty and the encouraging of single parenthood has been a disaster for the black community. I think this victimhood culture that's spread like a virus throughout this country has been a disaster for the black community. So I'm proposing a different solution. I'm not bringing up the data I brought up tonight because I'm using it to say, show me once where I said anything like, this proves that I dislike black people, or I don't want black people in my community, or I look at the average black person skeptically. I didn't say anything like that. And so I'm not going to let the charge of, but you're a racist, stop me. I don't care. I'm not going to shut up or kneel because a bunch of people that are racist themselves and want to focus on race and call people of some races inferior or evil based on the way they were born. I'm not going to listen to those people call me a racist. I'm not going to be a coward and afraid to talk about the actual problems and try to make this country better, not just for people that look like me, but for people of all colors. I'm not going to stop just because they throw out, you're a racist. That's what our Republican leadership does. And so that's why I think voices like me and yours out there are so important. I do home health care, Kitty Lighthouse, for people with developmental disabilities. So I get off work at 10 o'clock and I do live streams at some time. So that's why I think it's important, because who's out there? Who's out there right now in a position that has a voice? It's a bunch of people like us. We're the only people that are speaking up against this nonsense. So that's why it's so important. Well, I agree, Carvo. It is fruitless to convince them you're not racist. But then that means it's fruitless to give in to them. I'm not going to bow down to them. Yeah, and I'm not going to say, I have a relative that's a minority or a friend. That's irrelevant. I don't even need to go to that level. I know, I saw that, Carvo. They're terrible. So, but yeah, that's why I think it's important to support me. So support me financially if you can, because I like the monies. Now, because it will really help the channel out, and if you could like and share, it would mean a lot to me. So thank you, Hemp Bear. I really appreciate it. And again, just if you're new here, I welcome people from the left or the right. If you want to make fun of me, I don't care. You make fun of me. If you think I'm wrong, by all means, please say. I love disagreement. I'm trying to go out of my way to debate people from Black Lives Matter, to debate people from the left. I do it all the time. Well, I don't do it on my channel a lot. I'm going to try. Better equipment I get would mean I'll be able to do it more often. But I welcome people that disagree. I think that's how we come together. When we can have disagreements verbally and through conversation, we avoid violence. So I'm open to hearing people that disagree with me, absolutely. So thank you all so much. If you're watching and you're on the left, thank you for watching me. Support independent content creators, even if it's not me. And I'm humbled that each and every one of you will listen to me. I would be doing this show if there was one person listening. I just think it's absolutely humbling that people are willing to hear what I have to say. So, most of the time, Dan, I agree, Black Lives Matter won't debate. But I did have a couple, you can go back, check out, a couple weeks ago, I did some debates with a Twitch streamer named Destiny, who wouldn't call himself Black Lives Matter. But at least this other debate I did, it was about me versus 6 people, and at least 1 or 2 of them I think would claim to be associated with Black Lives Matter. Modern day debate. Okay, yeah, I'll check that out. Absolutely. So, all right, I'll check it out. I will mention that I debated Destiny. So, all right, everyone, I got to hit the sack. Thank you so much. I'll be back here tomorrow night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, and looking forward to see everyone there. Please stay safe, and as always, have a good one.